My story starts when I was 18 months old and I was adopted in London to a British, white, middle-class family. And I think when the social worker handed me over, she would have thought on that day she was handing me over to a good life, to a happy life, and a happy adoption. I have to say, in my very early years, that was true, and I couldn't have wished for more. I was daddy's girl, I was spoilt, had everything I really wanted. And my early childhood years were just brilliant. I just had a brilliant time from being adopted, up until the age of 12, when really life just changed for me overnight. My best friend was my father, and when I was 12, my father raped me. And from that moment on, my life went out of control. If you were to ask me, would I have told anybody? Absolutely not. He was my best friend. Would I have told my mother? Absolutely not. I wasn't particularly close to her. And I stayed in that abuse cycle for a couple of years, being abused on a weekly basis, really just trying to get through day to day, and believing that actually this was my fault and I was to blame. At 14, my mother got up and left me with my father. And he said to me at that time, from now on you can sleep in my bed every night. And I knew from 14 years onwards that, well, I felt my life was over. I sunk into suicidal misery and despair. I was self-harming, I was taking tablets, I was taking drink, I was running away from home, I was trying to do everything to block out what was happening to me, to anaesthetize myself from what was happening to me. And I remember on one occasion in London, I'd run away and I was sleeping rough for a couple of days, still going back home, bizarrely. It was my way of coping. But I remember sleeping rough and going into a phone box. If any of you can remember the day before cell phones, there was a time before we had cell phones. And I went into a phone box and there was a phone number in there of an organisation called Samaritans, which is a UK organisation, been around about 60 years, and it's there for people that are in crisis, that are suicidal. I phoned that number on that day. I didn't know what to expect. I felt very, very alone. I didn't want to lose control. I didn't want anyone swooping in, taking control away from me, but I just knew that I didn't want to be here and I didn't know what to do next. If any of you have ever felt suicidal, you'll know that's the scariest place in the world, because being scared of what's in your own head is really, really scary. How do you get away from your own head? Anyway, I called the number and a lady answered called Pam, and she talked to me, and over a series of a few phone calls, which over a period of a few weeks and a few months with different people that answered that phone, I eventually got to a point where I could seek support and seek help. It wasn't something that happened overnight, but it got me on that road to getting that support. And the reason that I got that support in the end was because that service was free, confidential, 24/7. I felt in control, and I wasn't talking to anyone who was a clinician. Nothing against any clinicians in the room or medically trained people, but actually at that point I didn't want to talk to anybody who was going to sort this out for me. I wanted someone to stand alongside me and go through that pain that I was experiencing, and that's exactly what Samaritans did. Now, the reason I tell you that story, because I realise we're at an Endwell conference, you might be wondering why I'm telling you that story, is just so you understand a bit about me, about my motivation, about my journey and what I've gone through, because actually that's important to what happens next. I think if you cut me in half, the words helpline, confidential, 24/7 would probably fall out of me. So that's who I am and that's what I'm about. So I'll talk to you what I'm supposed to be talking to you about now. So I come from London with news. I've got good news and I've got bad news. Okay? You might want to take a note of this groundbreaking revelation. The good news is we're all living longer. Okay? The bad news is we're all living longer. Okay. You may want to take a note of that, and you may not have realised this groundbreaking news was coming. Good news, yes, we're all living longer. 1 in 4 children born today will live till they're 100. The bad news is, actually, loneliness and isolation is now becoming a huge epidemic, and particularly amongst older people. We now know, in the last few years, we're now reporting on the health risks, i.e., loneliness is as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We know it increases the incidence of heart failure. We know it increases the incidence of early onset dementia. We know it increases increases blood pressure. We know it can lead to drug and alcohol dependence. Loneliness is bad news. It's really, really bad news. And for any people who like stats in the audience, I was reading recently that if the population grows in the same way that it has done over the last 20 years, at the same time as the loneliness epidemic continues, if we think of a country like China with a huge population there, by 2050, there will be 90 million lonely older people in China. Just one country, 90 million older people. This is a juggernaut, and I feel we do still have the ability to stop this juggernaut. Loneliness is not something that happens to other people. All of us may have felt lonely at a time in our lives, but this is something we can influence and that we can change. A definition of loneliness that I particularly like is that it's a mismatch, a subjective mismatch between the quality and the quantity of relationships that we have and those that we want. And for me, that explains why some people can live alone all their life, maybe have a very small group of friends and not feel lonely. Other people can be surrounded by huge numbers of people and still feel lonely. It's actually the mismatch between the quality, and I think the important word there is the quality and the quantity of those relationships, and the mismatch between what you would like and what you have. So this is a huge problem for us, and I haven't come here to depress you with bad news. Hopefully now I'm going to talk a little bit about the solution and what we've done in the UK to try and address this. Now, I don't know whether to be delighted or sad at this fact, because I think now internationally this is now, as I say, it's a topic people are talking about. And last year in the UK, our government appointed a Minister for Loneliness. So now, is that good news, or should I be ashamed? Because actually we might as well say, can we have a minister for talking to each other? Can we have a minister for being connected? Can we have a minister for just talking to your neighbour? In a way, it's embarrassing that we have to have a minister to point out to us that we might want to talk to our neighbour. I mean, it's great. I don't want to be against the British government. We won't do politics, and you'll probably get one day as well, a Minister for Loneliness. And if you can work out what they're doing as well, that's great. But I think it's sad at this point that we have to have a minister to be able to tell us to connect with each other and to look out for each other. Back in 2012, we have a broadcaster and a journalist in the UK called Esther Ranson, who's very famous, got a profile, and her husband died, and she wrote in the paper about her own loneliness and isolation. And she received such a huge response from the public, people saying, Esther, if you can say you're lonely, that gives me permission too. And I think what she realised was there's a whole stigma. The first problem is there's a stigma talking about loneliness and isolation. And she contacted me because she knew me through my work with Samaritans. I'd later gone on to become a volunteer, and I got to know Esther through Samaritans. And she contacted me and said, would I come along and work with her just to test out an idea that if a helpline of Samaritans has helped me so much, would something as simple as a 24/7 free confidential helpline for older people be the answer? So she invited me along. Weirdest job interview ever, to be chief exec of myself, because the organisation didn't exist. I had some of my best meetings in those days. And I became, it's all gone downhill since, but I became chief exec of myself. And we set up the Silver Line in 2012. Why do we call it the Silver Line? You see I'm on brand here with the silver hair, but actually silver is a precious metal, and we very much thought, actually older people are precious. This is not about you poor older person who's lonely, ring this helpline. This is about precious people who've got a lifetime of memories and experiences. So we set up a pilot of the helpline in 2012 in the northwest of England, and for any of you involved in the charity world, you'll know funding is really, really hard. And one of the main challenges when you're looking for funding is to evaluate impact. It's very difficult to evaluate impact if someone's 95 with a terminal illness. Feels pretty dreadful to actually say, how did you feel before you called the helpline? How did you feel afterwards? There's some things we can fix, some things we can't. So it's very difficult to measure that impact. But over that year, we did a lot of that evaluation. And as a result of that, we started out with very little money in the bank. But as a result of that, we did attract some funding from a big trust and foundation in the UK, which enabled us to launch the helpline nationally in 2013. So what we offer in the helpline is a 24/7 service. We have a mixture of volunteers and paid staff who are not professional, people who are similar to Samaritans, who are there all the time, listening and not giving advice, but being empathetic and being alongside people. We also have volunteer befrienders who make weekly phone calls to older people. We knew when we did our survey that 80% of the people we talked to said that television was their main form of company, and 15% of people said they had not talked to anyone for the last 3 to 4 weeks. So we knew we were trying to reach the most isolated and isolated older people. One thing we wanted to do when we thought of the name Silverline and what we are was not to describe ourselves as a helpline for lonely older people, because the moment you put the word lonely in, no one's going to ring you, because there's a stigma. So we're very vague. We are a helpline for older people. We don't even say the age, because we don't want someone to feel they can't ring. And we offer the 24/7 helpline. We offer the friendship service, which volunteers make weekly calls. We also offer something called Silver Circles, which is group friendship calls. One man said to me that this was the first time he talked to more than one person in 10 years. We take for granted talking to more than one person. And we have these brilliant calls where we have a gardening group, we have a book group, we have the funniest one, which is the music group, where people actually play musical instruments down the phone. Never heard anything like it. Not necessarily the same tune at the same time, but But something like music, actually sharing music with another person is just really, really important. So we've got these brilliant groups that are going on. What we also found, and I think, my work with Samaritans, I went back to volunteer because I felt with Samaritans they'd helped me so much. I think what we find with Silverline is a lot of people who are helped by the Silverline are now volunteering for the Silverline. And again, we don't want to call people service users. People who use our service are called Silverliners. They see themselves as part of our club. They want to be part of the club. Our oldest volunteer is 93, who supports a 96-year-old. Who's supporting who? I don't know, but there's reminiscence there. But actually, this isn't about saying you're the poor, lonely older person over here, and you are the supreme volunteer. Actually, it's saying you've got some interests, you can talk to each other, and you can actually help each other, and that's really, really important. So we launched in November 2013. To date, we've taken just under 3 million phone calls. We have over 230 staff. So over 230 staff. We've trained 4,500 volunteers now who make weekly calls from their own home. This is a really, really simple idea. I mean, in a way, we wonder why we didn't do this before. But the impact has been huge. We are now evaluating with the people that call our service, what is the difference to their well-being? How connected are they now? And actually, most of the people that we talk to have said, some people have actually said, I don't need a volunteer now, actually release my volunteer to someone else because actually I'm out in my community and I'm doing stuff. But we want to connect people back into their local community, but we want people to be part of the family, and that's really important to us to be part of that family. So what can all of you do? Now, I would love you all to set up a Silverline. I can demonstrate, I guess, or we can demonstrate that it is possible. We started off with very small resources. We have absolutely no government funding at all. We now raise £5 million a year in public donations to fund our service, but it is critical. And the reason it's particularly critical is that 24/7 element. And also supporting a generation of people that don't want to burden their family. And these people may have lots of family around them, but actually they say their family are very busy. We're all guilty, I think, of sending text messages rather than ringing people, or ringing people rather than dropping in to see them. So this is a generation of people who are saying, my family are really busy, and I don't, they certainly wouldn't ring their family at 2 a.m. if there was a problem. So we can be there and be that safety net. So in terms of what you can do, I guess there's a few things that you can replicate that model, and we're very happy to share what our model looks like and be very happy to share that with you. We're obsessed as a society in planning for our future in terms of financial planning for retirement. Everywhere I go, people tell me that they're worried about pension pots, they're worried about how much money they've got that when they retire. How often do we ever emotionally plan for our retirement? So if we had one of those magazines, with the quizzes where it's mostly A, B, C, and D, I would ask you to do one of these sort of quizzes yourself, not now, but later on, where you actually think, in the last week, how many people have I spoken to where it's not been about work? How many people, in my week, my conversations that I've had outside of working hours, obviously, how many people I've spoken to outside of working hours where it's not been about work? How many contacts have I actually got that are not work-related? One of the things we find very much at the Silverline is people haven't prepared for that retirement. So actually they do go over a cliff edge because after the first few months and the first few reunions, they realise they've invested everything into work, into those relationships. Particularly so with the generations we support, where it's maybe more of traditional, with the older people we support, where perhaps the male has been gone out to work and the wife has stayed at home. And actually, when the man particularly loses his wife, that can be a sort of double impact, because actually they may have not had contact with their work colleagues, but also the wife may have had the social connections. And I'm making very broad statements, but that's what we find. So the first thing I'd say is take care of yourself first. The second thing, and this sounds very sort of cliche to say, look out for each other. And it goes back to my point about we don't need a minister to talk to each other, surely. But I think we should be just not being afraid to ask people how they are. Not be afraid to knock on a neighbour's door if you've not seen them for a few days and see how they are. The worst thing they can do is put the door in your face. I hope they won't do that. That's the worst they can do. But just not being afraid to make those connections. A couple of new things we're just trialling in the UK now are, I don't know if you've heard of these, but we've got Chatty Benches. So in parks, we're now trialling benches with the word Chatty Benches on, which literally, we have to go back to basics here, don't we? But to explain to people, if you want to use your phone, if you want to play music and you want to be connected and you don't sit on a chatty bench. But if you want to chat, sit on that chatty bench and we will chat. And the other thing, the other initiative that's being trialled at the moment are slow queues in supermarkets. Now, we all know how frustrating slow queues are. But actually, in a world where everyone's rushing through and trying to do quick pay, what we've got is some slow aisles where actually you go as slow as you want through that aisle. And the cashier will talk to you, everyone will talk to you. You can spend half your day going down that queue. And the people jabbing you with the trolley can go in another queue and get through very quickly because they're very busy, very important. So they can go through there, and the slow queue means you can chat. It's really, really simple, isn't it? Really simple. So I'm going to finish. Mother Teresa was quoted as saying, the worst poverty of all is that of loneliness and a feeling unloved. And we really can, unlike some issues that just feel unsolvable, we can solve this one. It is simple stuff that we can do day to day that can solve this. And I was thinking before I come on about maybe throwing a challenge out here, because as we're all going to live to over 100, we're all going to be around for quite a while. And I was thinking back to that China stat that in 2050, there'll be 90 million older people. So if I'm invited, I don't know where Shoshana is, but invite me back in 2050. You can all come back too. This is my pledge. If you come, I'll come. I would like to be able to stand on the stage and say, I've got good news and I've got good news. Good news, we're living longer. And good news, we're living longer. That would be the legacy if we can do that. I'll probably come on a rocket because it will take 3 minutes rather than 11 hours. But I'd like to see you in 2050 to do that. So thank you for listening today, and thank you for your time.